Grizzly bear attacks are rare, but they can be terrifying and life-threatening when they happen. Though not naturally aggressive, grizzlies may respond with sudden force if they feel threatened or startled, or if their young are nearby. Their immense strength and speed make any encounter dangerous, especially when a bear is caught off guard. Staying informed about bear behavior and exercising caution in bear country are key to minimizing risk, underscoring the importance of respect and awareness in the wild. In the remote forests of Khabarovsk, Siberia, on April 7, 2025, a devastating encounter between law enforcement and local wildlife resulted in one of the deadliest bear attacks in Russian history. Rodan Petrovichkanet, 39, led a specialized team of 10 officers from the Siberian Regional Police Department, dispatched to investigate disturbing incidents in the villages surrounding the Kotate-Alin mountain range. For weeks, locals had reported livestock disappearances, property damage, and most alarmingly, 3 residents had gone missing within 14 days. Community members had grown increasingly fearful, suspecting that an unusually aggressive Russian grizzly bear was responsible. The police unit was well equipped, but perhaps underestimated the danger they faced. Having arrived at the area late in the afternoon, Kanov decided to establish a base camp from which they would conduct their investigation. The team split into 2 groups. 9 officers would maintain the main camp. At the same time, Officer Male Antonovich Sorokin took position at a lookout point approximately 300 meters away on higher ground. The location seemed ideal. A small clearing near a stream offered fresh water and good visibility. The officers failed to realize that they had unknowingly encroached upon a bear's territory. Later investigation revealed that they had set up camp less than half a kilometer from a den where a particularly large male Russian grizzly had been hibernating. The bear, estimated to weigh over 800 pounds, had awakened early from hibernation, likely due to unseasonably warm temperatures that spring. The officers prepared their evening meal, inadvertently creating food scents that would prove fatal. Wildlife experts would later speculate that the combination of human presence, cooking odors, and territorial intrusion created perfect conditions for disaster. As darkness fell across the Siberian wilderness, most of the team settled into their tents, while 2 officers maintained first watch. At around 2:15 a.m., Officer Sorokin reported hearing sudden shouting and commotion from the main camp. He saw a large shadow swiftly moving from his elevated position through the campsite. The bear, likely hungry due to a disrupted hibernation, had charged into the camp with alarming force. The attack was as brutal as it was swift. Officers Dmitry Vasilev and Pavel Levigin, who had been on watch, were the first casualties, unable to reach their weapons before the bear was upon them. The commotion awakened the remaining officers, but emerging from their tents only made them vulnerable targets in the darkness. Officer Skrokin later reported watching in horror as his colleagues attempted to defend themselves. He immediately radioed for emergency assistance, but could do little else without risking hitting his fellow officers in the darkness. The attack lasted less than 15 minutes, but its ferocity was unprecedented. By the time the bear retreated into the forest, 9 officers lay dead. The victims included team leader Knitov, weapons specialist Leonid Marovich, tactical officers Nikolai Vulov and Sergei Fedorov, evidence technician Anastasia Sokova, field medic Viktor Baranov, and junior officers Ivan Zaitsev, Alexei Orlov, and Tatiana Morosova. Officer Skrokin remained hidden at his lookout post until dawn, fearing the bear might return. As first light broke over the forest, he cautiously returned to the devastated campsite to confirm what he already knew. None of his colleagues had survived. Using the team's satellite phone, he contacted regional headquarters and requested immediate evacuation and assistance. Emergency response teams arrived 3 hours later, finding Skrokin in a state of shock. Veteran first responder Gregory Utkin described the scene as a battlefield rather than a bear attack. The victims had suffered catastrophic injuries consistent with the overwhelming force of a large Russian grizzly bear. Regional wildlife authorities led by Dr. Katerina Volova conducted an intensive search for the bear responsible. Tracker Mikhail Barukov identified the animal's trail leading deeper into the forest. After a 3-day hunt, they located and humanely euthanized the bear, confirming through DNA evidence that it was indeed responsible for the attack. Dr. Volkova's subsequent examination revealed that the bear was severely undernourished, weighing significantly less than expected for an adult male in spring. She noted evidence of dental disease and infected wounds on its paws, suggesting the animal had been suffering and likely struggling to hunt its natural prey. Combined with the early emergence from hibernation, these factors created a dangerously aggressive predator. The tragedy prompted immediate changes in departmental policy. All officers operating in wilderness areas would now receive specialized training in wildlife encounters, particularly concerning large predators. Camps must maintain strict food safety protocols, including storing all consumables in bear-proof containers at a minimum distance from sleeping areas. Local villages in the region implemented enhanced safety measures, including regular patrols and improved waste management systems to reduce wildlife attractions. For Officer Skrokin, who requested transfer to an urban precinct following the incident, the night of April 7, 2025 would forever remain a haunting reminder of how quickly a routine mission could turn to tragedy from a single, tiny mistake. In the dense, misty forests of a national park near Pokhara, Nepal in November 2019, an experienced local hunter met a violent end after a fateful encounter with an Asiatic black bear. Pranav Rajesh Tamang, a 47-year-old hunter from the nearby village of Ganduk, had been tracking game in these forests since his teenage years. Known throughout the region for his exceptional skills in stalking prey and knowledge of animal behavior, Tamang had built a reputation as one of the most accomplished hunters in the district. His expertise had been passed down through generations, with hunting being a cultural tradition and occasional necessity for his family and community. On that fateful morning of November 12th, Tamang set out before dawn, accompanied by his occasional hunting companion and guide, Dorj Sherpa. Their expedition had a specific purpose: to track and hunt a wild boar that had repeatedly damaged crops in their village. Local farmers had reported significant losses, and Tamang had volunteered to address the problem. The pair ventured deeper into the forest than usual, following fresh tracks that suggested the boar had retreated further into the wilderness. The weather that day presented challenging conditions. A light but persistent drizzle reduced visibility and dampened the forest floor, making tracking easier and more dangerous. The moisture helped preserve clear footprints, but also masked sounds that might have otherwise alerted them to nearby predators. As the morning progressed, Tamang and Sherpa separated slightly to cover more ground, maintaining communication through occasional whistles, as was their custom. Around mid-morning, while moving through a particularly thick section of underbrush approximately 12 kilometers from their village, Tamang unknowingly approached the temporary den of an Asiatic black bear. The area, characterized by dense vegetation and several fallen trees, had created a natural shelter that the bear had claimed. Later investigation by wildlife authorities would suggest that the bear was likely a female with at least one cub nearby, though the cub was never located. According to Sherpa's account, he heard Tamang's surprise shout, followed immediately by a roar. The distance between them, approximately 60 meters of dense forest, meant that Sherpa could not immediately see what was happening. Still, he immediately recognized the distinctive sound of an agitated bear. He reported rushing toward the commotion, calling out to Tamang while navigating the difficult terrain. By the time Sherpa reached the scene, the situation had already turned dire. He found Tamang on the ground, the bear standing over him. Tamang's rifle lay several meters away, unfired, suggesting he had either been unable to use it in time or had deliberately chosen not to shoot for fear of missing in the thick underbrush and further provoking. The animal. Sherpa shouted and waved his arms to frighten the bear away from his fallen companion. The agitated and defensive bear turned briefly toward Sherpa before returning to Tamang. In a desperate attempt to save his friend, Sherpa fired a warning shot into the air with his rifle. The sudden noise finally startled the bear enough that it retreated into the forest, though not before inflicting catastrophic injuries on Tamang. Sherpa rushed to Tamang's side, finding him conscious but gravely wounded. The bear's powerful claws had caused deep lacerations across Tamang's chest and abdomen, and bite wounds to his shoulder had severed major blood vessels. Using his limited medical supplies, Sherpa attempted to control the bleeding while continuing to make noise to prevent the bear's return. He applied pressure bandages and administered a single pain medication from their emergency kit. Despite his significant injuries, Tamang remained lucid enough to instruct Sherpa to leave him and seek help. Sherpa refused, instead fashioning a makeshift stretcher from branches in his jacket. He swiftly transported Tamang back toward their village, making painfully slow progress over the difficult terrain. After covering approximately 2 kilometers, they encountered 3 village youths who had ventured into the forest to collect firewood. The young men, Kiran Magar, Deepak Gurung, and Sunil Thapa, immediately abandoned their task to assist. 2 ran ahead to alert the village and summon additional help, while the third stayed with Sherpa to continue transporting Tamang. Despite their best efforts, Tamang's condition deteriorated rapidly. The blood loss was simply too severe, and the remote location meant professional medical help remained hours away. Approximately 3 hours after the attack, while still 4 kilometers from the village, Pranav Tamang succumbed to his injuries. His final words, as reported by Sherpa, acknowledged that the bear had been defending its territory and that he harbored no ill will toward the creature. When additional villagers reached them, they solemnly carried Tamang's body back to Ganduk, arriving after nightfall. The village health post worker, Saradida Pudel, officially pronounced him dead, listing massive trauma and blood loss as the cause. The community gathered to mourn one of their most respected members, with village elder Pim Bahadur Gurung noting that Tamang had always emphasized respect for the forest and its inhabitants, even as he hunted within it. The incident prompted Nepal's National Office for Parks and Wildlife to investigate. Senior wildlife officer Romesh Adhikari led a team that examined the attack site and interviewed witnesses. Their findings confirmed that the bear had likely protected either a food cache or cubs. Bears typically prepare for the leaner winter months in November by building fat reserves and establishing secure territories. In the following weeks,
Hi there, let's dive into this concept, a concept that should teach us the significance of coexistence with nature and the challenges faced when encountering wildlife. Of Tamang's death, local authorities conducted awareness programs, providing education about bear behavior and safety measures for those venturing into the forest. Rather than seeking retribution against the bear, the community, respecting Tamang's lifelong philosophy of coexistence with nature, requested better training and equipment for emergency medical response in remote areas. Dorj Sherpa, profoundly affected by the loss of his friend and his inability to save him despite his best efforts, eventually became an advocate for wildlife conservation in the region. He began working with local tourism boards to promote responsible trekking practices that minimized human-wildlife conflicts. As a testament to Tamang's influence, the bear remained unmolested, a powerful reminder of the beauty and danger inherent in one of Nepal's most precious natural landscapes. In the remote wilderness of Kodiak Island, Alaska, during the unusually warm summer of 2017, an experienced outdoorsman's solo camping trip transformed into a harrowing fight for survival after encountering one of North America's most formidable predators. Thaddeus Mackenzie Thornton, a 34-year-old wildlife photographer and survival enthusiast from Anchorage, had visited Kodiak Island numerous times over the previous decade. Having developed a deep appreciation for the island's untamed beauty and biodiversity, Thornton frequently ventured into its wilderness to document wildlife and test his survival skills. His photography of the island's bears in particular had earned him recognition in several nature publications. However, he maintained a healthy respect for the powerful animals and typically observed them from safe distances. On July 23, 2017, Thornton embarked on what was intended to be a week-long solo expedition along the Ayakalik River, a location renowned for its salmon runs and, consequently, its bear activity. The timing of his trip coincided with what should have been the peak of the salmon run. However, wildlife officials had noted that year's run was significantly diminished due to warming ocean temperatures, creating food scarcity that had altered typical bear behavior throughout the region. After a bush plane dropped him at a remote location approximately 20 meters from the nearest ranger station, Thornton hiked several hours before selecting his campsite. He chose a seemingly ideal spot near a bend in the river, setting up his tent approximately 50 yards from the water's edge. The location offered excellent opportunities for wildlife photography, with clear sightlines along the river where bears often fished. Though experienced in wilderness survival and bear safety protocols, Thornton made a critical error that evening, nearly costing him his life. After preparing his evening meal of freeze-dried pasta, Thornton stored most of his food in a bear-resistant container hung from a tree at the regulation distance from his campsite. However, he kept several energy bars and a package of beef jerky in his tent for convenient access during the night, violating one of the cardinal rules of camping in bear country. Additionally, he had placed his cooking pot with lingering food residue too close to his sleeping area after a pre-functor cleaning in the river. According to Thornton's later account, he fell asleep shortly after sunset, exhausted from the day's journey. Around 2:30 a.m., he awoke to a distinctive snuffling sound outside his tent. Years of wilderness experience immediately alerted him to the presence of a bear. Moving as quietly as possible, he reached for his bear spray, a potent capsaicin deterrent that he kept beside his sleeping bag. Before he could prepare himself further, the fabric of his tent shuddered as something massive pressed against it. In the next moment, the situation escalated dramatically. The bear, identified later as a mature male Kodiak, estimated to weigh approximately 1,200 pounds, tore through the tent side with one powerful swipe. Thornton described the sudden intrusion as like seeing a bulldozer materialize in my bedroom. The bear, likely drawn by the food sense, immediately began searching the tent interior, destroying Thornton's backpack. Thornton attempted to appear non-threatening while slowly moving toward the rent in the tent fabric. The bear, focused initially on the food it had detected, allowed Thornton a precious few seconds to react. As he scrambled through the torn tent opening, the bear noticed his movement and charged. Thornton reported that he managed to discharge his bear spray directly at the animal's face, creating a momentary distraction that allowed him to gain a few yards head start. With remarkable presence of mind despite the chaos, Thornton made for a nearby rocky outcropping that rose approximately 20 feet above the forest floor. The bear, temporarily disoriented by the spray but quickly recovering, pursued him with surprising speed. Thornton reached the rocks just ahead of the animal and scrambled up the steep surface, suffering deep lacerations to his left calf when the bear swiped at him during the ascent. From his precarious perch, Thornton watched as the bear circled below, occasionally standing on its hind legs to reach toward him. The standoff continued for nearly 3 hours, with the bear periodically returning to the destroyed campsite to consume the food it had found before returning to the outcropping. Throughout this time, Thornton maintained his position despite his bleeding leg wound and the near-freezing temperatures of the Alaskan night. As dawn approached, the bear finally retreated into the surrounding forest, apparently satisfied with the food it had scavenged from the camp. Thornton, suffering from exposure and blood loss, remained on the rock formation for an additional hour to ensure the bear had truly departed. When he finally descended, he found his campsite destroyed.
His tent was in tatters, his equipment scattered, and his satellite phone was damaged beyond repair. With his primary communication device disabled, Thornton knew he needed to reach the emergency radio, which he had carefully stored in a waterproof container inside his hung bear canister. Though weakened from his injury and the night's ordeal, he retrieved the radio and successfully contacted the Kodiak Island Ranger Station. Rangers Helena Norris and Marcus Webb responded to his distress call, immediately organizing a rescue operation. The remoteness of Thornton's location meant that help couldn't reach him immediately. Following the ranger's instructions, he used the first aid supplies from his emergency kit to clean and bandage his leg wound, then relocated to a more open area where a helicopter could eventually land. He maintained regular radio contact with the ranger station for nearly 6 hours while watching vigilantly for the bear's return. A Coast Guard helicopter located Thornton in the early afternoon, with paramedic Samantha Rodriguez descending to assess his condition before evacuation. He was transported to a community hospital where Dr. Eleanor Chang treated him for the deep lacerations to his left calf, mild hypothermia, and exhaustion. Though the wounds required 27 stitches and would leave permanent scarring, Thornton had escaped without life-threatening injuries. During his recovery, Thornton provided a detailed account of the incident to wildlife authorities and biologist Dr. Nathan Blackwell. The biologist noted that the bear's behavior was consistent with an animal experiencing food stress due to the poor salmon run that season. Typically, Kodiak bears would avoid human encounters when natural food sources were abundant, but the changing climate conditions had disrupted this natural balance. Thornton's experience prompted the Alaska Natural Resources authorities to issue additional warnings to visitors about increased bear activity and the critical importance of proper food storage. Park rangers enhanced their educational efforts using Thornton's experience as a cautionary example in wilderness safety presentations. The bear that attacked Thornton was never identified with certainty, though wildlife authorities noted increased sightings of an unusually large male throughout that season. As a testament to Thornton's respect for wildlife, despite his harrowing experience, he specifically requested that no attempt be made to track or eliminate the animal, noting that it had simply been acting according to its instincts in an increasingly challenging environment. In the expansive wilderness of a national park in the northwest corner of Wyoming during the late spring of 2022, what began as a routine wildlife survey nearly ended in tragedy when a team of park rangers unexpectedly encountered one of the park's most formidable predators. Senior wildlife biologist Dr. Ellison James Crawford led the 4-person squad to the park's northeastern section, locally known as the Lamar Valley. This region, often called America's Serengeti for its abundant wildlife, had reported increased bear activity that spring. The team's mission was to document population movements and assess potential human-wildlife conflict zones. Crawford, a 15-year veteran of the Parks and Wildlife Service, was accompanied by field technician Valentina Ramirez, junior ranger Zachary Holloway, and seasonal researcher Priya Nagarajan. On May 18, 2022, the team established their research camp near a secluded tributary of Soda Butte Creek. The location offered excellent access to several wildlife corridors that they planned to monitor over the next 3 days. The area's topography featured scattered stands of lodgepole pines, interspersed with open meadows, providing visibility and natural cover for their observation work. Spring wildflowers carpeted the valley, and recent rains had left the landscape vibrantly green. The team spent their first day setting up monitoring equipment, including trail cameras and non-invasive hair snares designed to collect DNA samples from passing bears. Weather conditions were ideal, clear skies with temperatures reaching the mid-60s Fahrenheit. That evening, they recorded their findings and planned the next day's routes while enjoying dinner at their campsite. Following standard park protocol, they properly secured all food items and scented products in bear-resistant containers, placed a regulation distance from their sleeping area. According to later reports, nothing during that first night suggested imminent danger.
After breakfast, the team awoke early on May 19th and split into 2 groups to cover more ground. Crawford and Holloway headed northwest to check several camera stations, while Ramirez and Nagarajan moved southeast along the creek to assess potential den sites that had been previously mapped. Disaster struck at approximately 1:45 p.m. as the team prepared to reconvene at camp for their midday data comparison. Crawford and Holloway had just begun packing their equipment when they heard a distinctive huffing sound from a nearby thicket. Before either could react, a female grizzly erupted from the vegetation less than 30 yards away, charging directly toward them with remarkable speed. Holloway later recounted that Crawford immediately yelled for him to deploy his bear spray while attempting to create distance between them, a standard procedure to avoid both becoming targets of the same attack. As Crawford moved leftward, the bear momentarily hesitated before focusing its charge on him. Holloway discharged his bear spray, but a sudden gust of wind rendered it largely ineffective. The bear closed the distance to Crawford within seconds. Though he managed to deploy his spray, the bear was already too close for the deterrent to take full effect. The impact of the charging grizzly knocked Crawford to the ground, where the
bear immediately began mauling him. Holloway, witnessing his colleague's peril, retrieved the team's emergency shotgun from his pack and fired a warning shot into the air. The loud report temporarily distracted the bear, which retreated several yards before turning toward Holloway. In this crucial moment, rather than firing at the animal, Holloway decided to retreat, reasoning that getting help for Crawford was the priority. He scrambled up a nearby slope while making loud noises to keep the bear's attention divided. His strategy proved partially successful. After a momentary pursuit of Holloway, the bear returned to Crawford, who had managed to roll into a protective position. The bear inflicted additional injuries before something in the distance, possibly the approaching voices of Ramirez and Nagarajan, who had heard the shotgun blast, caused it to flee into the forest abruptly. Holloway immediately returned to Crawford, finding him severely injured but conscious. Using their field radio, he contacted park emergency services while applying first aid to Crawford's wounds, which included deep lacerations to his back, shoulders, and scalp, along with defensive wounds on his forearms. Ramirez and Nagarajan arrived minutes later, having run toward the shotgun sound. Nagarajan, who had previous medical training, took over emergency care, while Ramirez established a security perimeter and repeatedly used noisemakers to prevent the bear's return. The team moved Crawford to a small clearing where helicopter evacuation would be possible. The National Park's emergency response helicopter, staffed by flight paramedic Theodore Wilson and pilot Sophia McDermott, reached the location within 40 minutes of receiving the distress call. Wilson later described Crawford's injuries as severe but survivable due to his teammates' immediate and appropriate response. The helicopter transported Crawford to a medical center in Idaho Falls, the nearest Level 2 trauma center. Crawford spent 3 weeks in the hospital, followed by 4 months of intensive rehabilitation. The attack prompted the national parks officials to review their field research protocols. New guidelines were implemented, requiring teams to carry additional deterrence and communication devices. Training programs for seasonal staff were enhanced to include more extensive sections on bear behavior and appropriate responses to encounters. Crawford concluded with a simple yet powerful message that the wilderness remained wild and they were privileged visitors who ought to learn to share the landscape with all its inhabitants, even those who reminded them of their vulnerability. In the remote wilderness of Russia's Amur Oblast region, during the unusually warm autumn of 2016, a family outing into the tiger forest ended in unimaginable tragedy when a Russian grizzly bear killed a mother while her children watched in terror from nearby. Ekaterina Mikhailna Sorokina, a 36-year-old biology teacher from the small town of Blagoveshchansk, had planned... Hey everyone, let's dive into a fascinating concept, like a weekend nature excursion with her children, 10-year-old Alexei and 8-year-old Nadia. Sorokina, known by colleagues and friends for her passionate advocacy of environmental education, frequently organized outings to cultivate her children's appreciation for the natural world. Having grown up in the region herself, she possessed considerable knowledge about local flora and fauna, including appropriate safety measures for wilderness excursions. On September 17, 2016, the family drove approximately 40 kilometers northeast of Blauvess to the Kinga Nature Reserve periphery, an area known for its biodiversity and spectacular autumn foliage. The day began ideally: crisp air, clear skies, and forests ablaze with red and gold leaves. Later, local rangers noted that the exceptionally warm autumn had disrupted normal wildlife behavior patterns, with many animals, including bears, altering their pre-hibernation feeding habits and territory ranges. The family spent the morning collecting mushrooms and identifying plant species, with Sorokina documenting finds in her nature journal for later use in her classroom. Around midday, they settled in a small clearing to enjoy their packed lunch. The location, approximately 12 kilometers from the nearest ranger station, featured a picturesque view of the surrounding hills and had been used as a picnic spot by previous visitors, as indicated by an old fire ring. After lunch, Sorona led her children along a narrow trail that followed a small tributary of the Za River, intending to teach them about riparian ecosystems. Approximately 1 kilometer from their picnic spot, they discovered fresh bear tracks near the water's edge in the soft mud. Recognizing the potential danger, Sorona immediately instructed her children to turn back toward their vehicle, maintaining a calm demeanor to avoid frightening them while ensuring they moved quickly. As they retreated, Soroka positioned herself behind her children, occasionally looking back to ensure they weren't being followed. The family had nearly reached their original clearing when a crashing sound emanated from the dense underbrush to their right. Before they could react, an enormous Russian grizzly bear emerged approximately 15 meters away, cutting off their direct path back to their vehicle. With remarkable presence of mind, Sorona instructed her children to slowly move toward a cluster of large boulders approximately 30 meters to their left. As they began to comply, the bear showed immediate interest in their movement. Sorona, making a decision that ultimately saved her children's lives, told them to run for the rocks. At the same time, she remained in place, speaking loudly and making herself appear larger by raising her arms, textbook techniques for deterring bear aggression. From their position of relative safety atop the boulders, Alexei and Nadia witnessed what followed. The bear, a male, later estimated by wildlife officials to weigh approximately 300 kg, charged toward their mother. Despite her attempts to appear threatening by shouting and swinging her backpack, the bear closed the distance within seconds. The attack that followed was swift and devastating. Though Sorowina attempted to protect herself by curling into a defensive position, the bear's overwhelming strength rendered her efforts futile. The children, following their mother's final instruction to stay put no matter what, remained frozen in horror on the boulders throughout the attack. After several minutes, the bear dragged Soroka's body a short distance into the underbrush before apparently losing interest and moving away from the area, perhaps disturbed by the children's terrified sobbing. Alexa and Nadia remained on the boulders, afraid to move. Finally, gathering extraordinary courage for a child his age, Alex determined they needed to seek help. Instructing his younger sister to remain hidden, he sprinted to their vehicle where Sorokina had left a mobile phone in the glove compartment. Though cell reception was poor, he connected with emergency services long enough to communicate that there had been a bear attack. Regional emergency responder Mail Petrov received the distress call at approximately 4:15 p.m. Despite the garbled connection and limited information, his team immediately deployed toward the coordinates they could extract from the partial call. Additionally, the local forestry service dispatched Ranger Pavel Knitsov, who was patrolling nearby and could reach the location more quickly. Ranger Knit arrived first approximately 45 minutes after receiving the alert.
Following Nadia's cries, he located the children and secured them in his vehicle before briefly assessing the scene. Emergency medical services, led by paramedic Anastasia Vulova, arrived 20 minutes later, but could only confirm what Knit had already determined. Katerina Soroka had died from the massive injuries sustained during the attack. As twilight approached, police investigator Dmitry Orov coordinated the recovery operation, while wildlife specialist Nikolai Baranov examined the site for evidence regarding the bear's behavior. The children were transported to a hospital where pediatric psychologist Dr. Tatiana Morozova began the process of addressing their acute trauma. Physical examination confirmed that neither child had sustained bodily injuries, though both exhibited symptoms of severe psychological shock. The children's father, Viktor Sorokin, a maritime engineer working in Vladivostok, returned home immediately upon notification of the tragedy. In the following days, he provided investigators with additional context, revealing that Ekaterina had been trained in wilderness safety and had previously encountered bears at a distance without incident. Her background in biology had given her confidence, perhaps too much, in navigating wildlife encounters. The tragedy prompted immediate changes to visitor protocols in the nature reserve. Director Alex Knit implemented stricter regulations regarding family visits, including mandatory bear safety courses for all visitors.
Requiring groups to carry bear deterrent spray. Additional warning signs were installed throughout the reserve, and certain high-risk areas were closed to visitors during periods of increased bear activity. A memorial service for Ekaterina Sorokina drew hundreds from Blagoveshchensk and surrounding communities. Her school established the Sorokina Nature Education Fund in her honor, providing resources for children to learn about wildlife conservation and wilderness safety. Colleagues described her as a dedicated teacher who had inspired countless students to pursue careers in environmental science and conservation. For the children, recovery proved to be a long and difficult process. Both received intensive therapy for post-traumatic stress disorder, with Alex particularly struggling with survivor's guilt. Viktor Sorokin eventually relocated the family to Khabarovsk, seeking a fresh start away from the painful memories associated with Blagoveshchensk. The site of the attack was ultimately marked with a small memorial plaque placed not to commemorate the tragedy itself, but to honor Ekaterina's love for the wilderness and her ultimate sacrifice that saved her children. Local guides now include her story in their safety briefings, a powerful reminder of the beauty and danger inherent in Russia's wild spaces. In the stark, icy wilderness of Norway's Svalbard archipelago, during the perpetual daylight of Arctic summer in 2018, an experienced wildlife photographer's passion for capturing the region's apex predator nearly cost him his life. Svalbard, located halfway between mainland Norway and the North Pole, comprises islands characterized by rugged mountains, massive ice fields, and desolate tundra. Sebastian Alaric Finnegan, a 42-year-old wildlife photographer from Melbourne, Australia, had built his reputation documenting endangered species across the globe. With numerous awards and publications in prestigious nature magazines, Finnegan was known for his willingness to endure extreme conditions to capture compelling images. His fascination with polar bears had brought him to Svalbard multiple times over the previous decade. Finnegan arrived in Longyearbyen, Svalbard's administrative center, on July 8, 2018. After consulting with local guides for several days and reviewing recent bear sightings, he chartered a small boat with experienced Arctic guide Ingrid Johansson to explore the remote northeastern coast of Spitsbergen, Svalbard's largest island. The area, part of the Nordstar Nature Reserve, was known for its healthy polar bear population, but required special permits and strict adherence to safety protocols for human visitors. The expedition began favorably. On July 12th, Finnegan and Johansson spotted several bears hunting along the ice edge, allowing Finnegan to capture impressive telephoto images from the safety of their boat.
However, Finnegan expressed interest in obtaining ground-level photographs showing the bears in the context of their increasingly fragile habitat, images he believed would more powerfully communicate the species' vulnerability to climate change. After careful consideration
and extensive safety planning, Johansen agreed to accompany Finnegan onto a stable shore area on July 14th. They selected a location with good visibility and multiple escape routes, and both carried high-powered rifles, standard safety equipment in Svalbard, where the law requires armed protection when venturing outside settlements. Additionally, they brought flare guns, bear spray, and portable tripwire alarm systems to establish a secure perimeter for their temporary observation blind. According to Johansen's subsequent account, the first 6 hours ashore proceeded without incident. From their camouflaged position approximately 300 meters inland from the shore, they observed a female bear with a single yearling cub hunting seals along the ice edge. Finnegan successfully photographed the pair, though he repeatedly expressed disappointment with the distance, believing his images lacked the intimate quality he sought. At approximately 8:30 p.m., despite the midnight sun illuminating the landscape with perpetual daylight, visibility deteriorated as a fog bank rolled in from the sea, a common occurrence in Svalbard's summer. Johansen immediately suggested they retreat to their boat until conditions improved, but Finnegan requested just 15 more minutes to capture the bears in the atmospheric mist. This decision, delaying their withdrawal as visibility decreased, would prove nearly fatal. While preparing to leave, their attention focused on packing camera equipment. Neither noticed a lone male bear approaching from downwind. Unlike the mother and cub they had been observing, this bear had moved inland, possibly following their scent. Arctic wildlife experts later suggested that diminishing sea ice had likely increased the bear's food stress, making any potential food source, including humans, worth investigating. The bear was approximately 40 meters away when Johansen finally spotted it through the fog. She immediately alerted Finnegan and reached for her rifle. But Finnegan, rather than retreating, raised his camera for what he would later describe as the shot of a lifetime. This momentary delay proved costly. The bear, perhaps interpreting their movements as threatening or simply responding to curiosity, charged with the explosive speed characteristic of polar bears. Johansen fired a warning shot, but the bear continued its advance. As she prepared to fire directly at the animal, standard protocol when human life is in imminent danger, the bear veered sharply toward Finnegan, who stood partially exposed from their blind camera still raised. The attack happened with shocking speed. The bear, estimated to weigh approximately 1,000 pounds, knocked Finnegan to the ground with a powerful swipe. Johansen immediately fired at the bear, but missed in the poor visibility and chaotic situation. She quickly chambered another round and fired again as the bear began mauling Finnegan, this time striking the animal in the shoulder. The wounded bear retreated several meters, but remained agitated and,
in a desperate maneuver, Johansen fired multiple flares between the bear and Finnegan while approaching her injured companion. The combination of the wound and the flare's intense light and noise finally drove the bear away into the fog. Johansen quickly assessed Finnegan's condition, finding him conscious but severely injured with deep lacerations across his torso and a partially crushed left shoulder. Using their satellite phone, Johansen contacted Svalbard's emergency services. Due to the remote location and hazardous flying conditions caused by the fog, the rescue helicopter from Longyear Bay would face significant challenges reaching them. Johansen established a defensive perimeter with remaining flares and began administering first aid from their emergency kit, applying pressure bandages to Finnegan's most severe wounds while continuously scanning for the bear's return. Johansen maintained this vigil for nearly 3 hours, periodically updating emergency services on Finnegan's deteriorating condition while watching for both the rescue helicopter and the wounded bear. When Finnegan lost consciousness due to blood loss and shock, she made the difficult decision to attempt moving him back to their boat despite the risk of aggravating his injuries. Using their equipment tarp as an improvised stretcher, she began the arduous process of dragging him toward the shore. After covering approximately 100 meters, Johansen heard the welcome sound of approaching rotor blades. Pilot Lars Eriksson and paramedic Sonja Christensen had managed to navigate through breaks in the fog to reach their position. The rescue team quickly stabilized Finnegan and transported him to a hospital in Tromsø on the mainland. Surgeon Dr. Magnus Larsson led the team that worked for 11 hours to repair Finnegan's extensive injuries. These included 4 broken ribs, a shattered left scapula, a punctured lung, and deep tissue damage requiring over 300 stitches across multiple wound sites. Remarkably, none of his injuries proved fatal or permanently debilitating, though his recovery would require months of intensive rehabilitation. The incident prompted Svalbard authorities to review their regulations regarding wildlife photography expeditions. The governor implemented new requirements for photographers, including mandatory advanced safety training and stricter protocols for ground-based observation. Additionally, all photography permits now require submission of detailed safety plans specifically addressing changing weather conditions. For her part, Johansen received Norway's Medal for Heroic Deeds for her actions during the crisis. Though deeply affected by the traumatic experience, she continued her work as an Arctic guide after taking several months off to process the events. She became an outspoken advocate for responsible wildlife tourism that balances human interest with animal welfare and safety. On the anniversary of the attack, Finnegan returned to Svalbard, not to photograph bears, but to participate in climate research and to help train new guides.
Safety protocols. Standing on the shore near where his near-fatal encounter occurred, he reflected that his greatest regret was not the injuries he sustained, but the fact that a bear lost its life because of human error. He told assembled journalists that every polar bear was precious in a warming world. His mistake cost one its life, and that was a debt he could never repay, except by working to ensure their future on this planet.